Good evening again. Dobra večer. We are here connecting directly from the Historical Center of Split. I'm Marina from Culture Hub Croatia. Together with me, we have my colleague Jasmina Šarić, who is going to lead the conversation with Katarina tonight. We just want to thank you for joining us both here on Zoom and also on Facebook, where we are going live. We are very happy to start our project Praznine 2021 Voids project precisely with this CHC talk tonight. We started the program today and we are really happy that we are really excited that we can actually do a project like this in times of COVID and with all of these challenges. Yeah, tonight we started repurposing the spaces in the center and converting them into the open studios for artists, and also giving them to the local community to actually do their own activities in these spaces. We would like to also invite you to see the full program of the project. I'm going to share here the link in the chat where you can actually read all about it if you still don't know much about how this works, but you can also find the full program. This is a 3-week project, and we are going to have lots of activities throughout these 3 weeks. So you can find the full program there, and you can also visit us if you are in Split. You can stop by to Dominisova 3. It's we are using actually the one of the restaurants here in the center, and we are there every day. So you can stop by and take also a printed version of the program and see some of the activities that are actually happening there. I would just very shortly like to take your attention to the fact that this meeting is registered. So we hope that everyone agrees with that. And also it's being streamed not only on Facebook, but we are also projecting the video in one of the window shops, precisely here in one of the restaurants that we are using in Dominisova Street. So in case you are walking by, you can stop and have a look at this conversation that is happening and listen to it from the street itself. So we are really paying attention to all the measures, not really doing events, but we are very happy that we can at least find some kind of creative solutions to making this happen. I would also like you to note that we can use our chat, and I would like to encourage you to use the chat and ask your questions. You can also post it in Croatian, and then we are going to translate it. So you can ask anything that you have for Katarina, and we are going to address your questions at the end. You can also do that if you are watching us live on Facebook, because we are going to check both sides for questions, and we are going to have some time at the end to talk about that. We can also give you floor if you want. If you want to speak, please raise your hand by using reactions. It's in the bottom of your Zoom account. You can see reactions and raise hand. We are going to also give you floor in case you want to ask anything at the end. I don't know if I forgot anything, but I hope not. I would like to now ask you guys who are in Zoom, and also you who are joining on Facebook, if you want to do so, to share something about you. Where are you connecting from? Tell us a little bit about your background. You can present yourself a little bit in the chat, so just that we know who is here with us tonight. That would be really great. And in the meantime, I'm going to give now the floor to Jasmina, and I'm really happy that we can start this conversation.
Thank you, Marina. We are very happy to welcome Katarina tonight. We are sorry that she couldn't come here in person and have her residency here in Split now, but we did our best to to show her work here. So if you are in Split, today until 9 p.m. and tomorrow from 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. You can see Katarina's work in exchange office in Nepotowa 1. It is her video tourist agency that we will also talk about tonight. I would just like to briefly introduce Katarina. I'm not going to talk much about her work, but just to say that Katarina is an artist and photographer from Belgrade, but she's currently based in Vienna. And she's currently a candidate for PhD in artistic research at the University of Applied Arts Vienna, with her research on traveling tourism and coastal tourist zones. Parallel to this, she also works as a photographer commissioned in the field of portrait, fashion, and reportage photography. Katarina, thank you for joining us. I will now give the floor to you, and maybe we can start also with a more broad introduction to your work and your background. So if you can tell us maybe more about what kind of position do you come from, and give us a short introduction to your research.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for this introduction as well. Yeah, well, it is said that I'm not in Split, but I will try to somehow make best out of this weird situation that we have, that we are like in all these different places at once. Yeah, well, my background, I think it's important to say that I graduated from the University of Applied Arts here in Vienna as a graphic designer, but I never worked as a graphic designer. I quite early decided not to do that, but also quite early it happened that I started working as a photographer. In that sense, there are also somewhat two paths in a way that I use photography. There is this one that you mentioned where I make a living with making pictures, but then there is also this other part where I very much work with photography and where I use photography as a tool together with written words to make some kind of explorations in different directions. And I would say that what happened after and maybe also during my studies was that I very often would use these tools in order to understand some social phenomenon that was interesting to me. And very often it was happening that I would then results of these investigations shape, or not only results, but also the processes would shape in a format of a photo book. So that was something that I used a lot. And I, at some point, also got a little bit frustrated by the fact that these photo books were not really treated in a manner that I would want them to be treated, meaning that people were not really reading the text, where I always had text as a equally relevant part of my work as pictures were. So then I somehow started thinking, okay, and also like parallel to that, when I was seeing my work exhibited in different contexts, I started thinking, is it really where my work should be? Or like, is it the way that I want my work to be presented? And where is it that my work happens? Because I also somehow started feeling alienated with my own work when it was presented in a wrong context. So I started thinking, okay, if my work doesn't, if I don't produce my work because I'm result oriented, then where my work happens. And in this way, I started thinking of different formats and also like searching for ways to put text in a same equal line with photos. And I then invented this one, I coined the word, or like a term that I use a lot, that I call it audio photo book, as something that helps me deal with these possible readings of images and also relations between text and images among them and so on. So if I have to talk about my background, I would say that I very much work with image and text, but I don't my goal within my work is not to produce an image that will then stand alone, but rather to work with photography and through photography, and then to search for ways to shape these processes and to make them communicate also questions that I was dealing with during my work. And yeah, well, then there is this term of artistic research that came quite handy, because I struggled when I was younger to like identify as an artist. And then when I realized that there is a word that somehow covers exactly what I feel I was always doing, having some question in my mind and then searching for ways to explore these topics with tools that I have at hand, it came quite natural to also apply for this program that you mentioned as well, this PhD in artistic research, where I'm now a candidate for PhD. And maybe now we can really show this little part of this video, because I think this can maybe to some degree also show one example of like my attempts to deal with this, what I mentioned, like audio photo book, or what is a book, what is reading, what is all of that. Yeah, somehow like this.
The time has come to take off. I look at lists and rankings. I look at prospects, the sun and sea, and no humans. I've always been obsessed with buildings. They are where people live and where they hide. Imagine a building without walls, all the rooms like little microcosms, chaoses pretending that each other do not exist. Then you go on holiday, you search for the sun and the sea without humans. But humans always find me. Each time I seek to find myself, I find myself escaping, and in spite of all the sun that binds me, the only direct light I can hope for comes to me through reflection.
To talk about photography and visual material while not presenting that material to people. So that's also something challenging and maybe also interesting to do. Maybe it gives up some other aspects of it. So I actually wanted to maybe start with this topic of tourism. Because you mentioned tourism in your research title, actually, and it is also a starting point for our project. But then we kind of move out of that specific context and kind of broadening during the practices that we do here, which is also the same thing that you do. You use actually the tourism as something that you start from, and then you actually use it to do your research and to come to the outcomes that you envisioned. So what is so actually, why did you choose tourism in a way that, what is so specific about the tourist gaze in photography, especially?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I was in the first place really curious about the tourist gaze. I think I started from a very personal frustration as a witness of gradual change and destruction of landscape in Montenegro, where I traveled a lot as a kid and through my life. So I found this one book from 66, where many spots that I very well know and love in Montenegro were depicted, and I was really shocked that many of those I could not really recognize anymore. And then I wanted to perform a very banal comparison, to like actually just go and find exact places from which these pictures from 66 from the book in 66 were taken, and then to repeat the same picture from, it was in 2015 when I was doing it. So what it do is what we can all somehow imagine, right? Like you have a picture from long ago, and then you have this one new picture where something totally different is visible, or nothing is visible because something was built in between where you stand and where you want what you want to see. But what I just somehow realized is that even though it did open a lot of questions that are somehow predictable set of questions when you start this kind of research that deals with a social phenomenon. Many questions were on my list that are somehow also coming from different other disciplines. But I think that very early I became aware that I'm not so interested in tourism itself, but rather in understanding how can image and the photographic image, or can it at all, and what are the capacities of standalone photographic image to question this phenomena and to comment or encourage any kind of thinking of these issues. And that meant that I would have to actually deconstruct my whole previous practice in order to understand what is it that I do. And doing also artistic research within an institution, you suddenly have a great excuse and reason and time, and it became somehow my main topic, to understand what is it that I do. And even in that very example of Montenegro case, when I retrospectively look at it, I can see that I even then did something that I did every next time when I traveled, in order to observe tourism and to observe people who travel, and myself observing people who traveling myself. So it's like a circle that is repeating many times. And so maybe it's not really a tourist gaze that I got curious about. I got curious about how the tourists are perceived, and what do we know about them. And then you have all these different theoretical approaches that I of course read about, but then I wanted to test in my own practice, meaning that I would then go and watch, literally observe and even spy on people doing things. And then maybe apparently at some point I started also observing myself observing them. So I don't know if this is answering your question, because I am not so into really like I think I had to become a tourist myself in order to start understanding tourists, like to actually admit that I'm gonna.
Yeah, at the end of this video, you actually say, I didn't come for this, I have come for humans. So maybe this is something that you also now explain more. But I'm really curious about now what you mentioned about this transformation from observer to participant, which you also talk about in this work. And how both observers and participants are equal actors in tourism as a constructed situation. So how do you see yourself in this transformation, or I don't know, people around you? When do you become, is there a line between observer and participant, and when do you become one and another?
In this very example that we didn't manage to see, and I will put the link later in the chat so that you can watch it on your own, who is not in Split at the moment, so that you can. It was only later clear to me that I was doing exactly what you said. I thought I'm going to observe. Actually, first I wanted to be a participant in a way that I wanted to rent a hotel that I would usually never rent. To book the room in a hotel that I would usually never book, and then maybe that's also important to now already introduce these words. It's like being on a mission, like I have a set of questions, I have a set of very precisely defined curiosities. And in this very case, I actually wanted to test exact knowledge that I collected from theory. So I read books about tourism that are canonic books about tourism, and then I noticed few very interesting phenomenon that I then went to find out, and then to also see how does it feel to be there where I would usually never be. And I'm most of the time curious if this desire is something that people share, no matter the taste or class or what separates us. Is there anything that maybe connects us within this desire for traveling? And I would then go there and I would watch this, and then to be participant and to observe at once. I tried to overcome the distance. I really tried to blend in and be one of these people, because I'm also there for traveling, right? But then at the same time, I have my tools and I have real precise questions on my mind. And it is funny who is watching whom, because while I'm watching people, I start actually questioning my own position within this situation. And at some point, maybe it really blends and it's not really clear anymore if I'm the one who notices things that the other would notice as well. Or am I just, like, and that's the question back to this, like, do we share desire, or do we, and is there some discovery that would then connect us? If I'm a researcher and they're just traveling to explore something else that I can't, say what it is it maybe something that we are then similar about? And then maybe I'm not only participant and observer, I'm also narrator, like, because at the same time, I'm coming back with the reports. And I think that's the biggest part of my role, because I know that this will happen afterwards. So I think I'm the least of a participant, and then mostly I'm observer. And then after all, I narrate about this experience of myself observing other participants in the situation that we all share.
You mentioned one interesting position, and that's the position of amateur or the amateur's eye. So you say that in your work you deliberately take the role of the curious amateur while still being an expert in taking subjective point of view or switching these points of view, and which is of course permitted in arts. So what do you think, or what do you see as advantages of seeing something with this kind of eye, amateur's eye, or seeing something for the first time? And how do you negotiate these two positions with one of the professional and one of the in relation to what you see?
Maybe this because I introduced this notion of amateur when I also think of artistic research as a field, and especially when it happens in an institution, there is a big debate, and I think people who have to deal with this topic of artistic research often find themselves justifying their positions and like comparing to sciences and comparing to other expertises, and that's something where I felt like, okay, but I'm not meant to be an expert in none of the fields that are already dealing with the topic of tourism. There are sociologists and anthropologists and urban planners and architects and many different angles from which this topic is being explored. And I deliberately, in the beginning of this research, say that it's not my plan or goal to become an expert for tourism, but rather to see what can artists bring within her research in the overall knowledge on the topic. This means some sort of also emancipation of myself within the field of artistic research, claiming certain position that is given exactly to that one. Meaning that I would hope, and I'm curious, what are the ways to translate this to broader audiences, but to somehow claim that there is something that artists can find out that is relevant for understanding the, for example, topic of tourism, that is then comparable or also relevant from other points of view. In this way, I stay amateur because I also think that this is some kind of naive position that somehow also allows you see things that you would otherwise not see, because maybe for the rigid rules that are implemented in other different disciplines. That would be maybe the way to look at it, to take this freedom of seeing things with this kind of naivety that can then bring insights that you would not have just watching it from a very strict position of expert.
I would just like to remind you all that if you have any questions for Katarina, you can just post them at any time, and we will read them later. But I wanted to also ask you about your travels during this research. Which places have you visited, and which ones are you planning to visit? How did you choose them? Like geographically speaking, are there any kind of landscapes that are particularly interesting to you? And what kind of experiences did you envision to collect while seeing this landscape and visiting it?
Well, okay, maybe we tried to watch this video from Benidorm. Before that, I had these examples from Montenegro. Benidorm was I mean, I actually luckily have this thing here. I found this in one magazine for diving, and it took me 10 minutes trying to find on this piece of paper a location of these swimming pools. And only because there is one little, I think there is a name of one of the hotels that somehow can lead me towards understanding that this must be Egypt, but otherwise it's not mentioned. So this is like promoting a place, like this kind of very generic place that we saw millions of times, and it doesn't say where it is. So I somehow started like little research on like how these places are usually promoted, and I collected millions of similar pictures coming from different places and continents, and then I zoomed out to understand where they are exactly. And at some point I came to this place, Benidorm, that I did not know was existing, because it was so strange that this place was in Spain. And I got mostly curious because it's so packed with skyscrapers, and I'm very obsessed. At some point I become very obsessed by buildings in this way, and blocks of buildings, and imagining people living in this kind of places. And one more thing that personally really attracted me was this one very huge building that is not abandoned, but was actually never even inhabited. So this was my personal reason to go to Benidorm. And then I realized that it's a place where usually people from like a middle, like working class people from UK would go there for holidays. And I was going in February, so it was all about very old people and maybe some young people, but people will be very wasted old. I mean, sadly that you cannot see this video. I will soon give you the link so that you can watch it later. And then later I was in London, where I had a residency in 2018, and I used a chance to visit Blackpool because it's historically important place to understand mass tourism, and where it all somehow started in a way that workers were sent for longer weekends to do their leisure and short holidays. And then I was also in Rogoznica and Vodice, where I was because of all the wild architecture that is being built, just to understand this change of landscape. And then I was in Venice, and in Venice I was curious about I was observing tourist guides, like people who guide other people, like where to go and what to look at, and so on. And then I have this example from Vienna, what was a little task for myself to see how can one be a tourist at home. What does this bring, and what does it take to try? Does it work at all? What was later very funny, because we got Corona, and then it was really like, I have one little thesis that says that exotica is always in the neighborhoods, and nowadays I think we really have to give it a space to like really start thinking in this direction, what I think that also industries are doing. And then I have example from Funchal, where I was curious, as I noticed that this very touristy zone is taking exactly the coast. So in order to get to the sea, you would need to go through the hotels. So I was observing this ability to get to the sea. Like, how can you get to this? Let me see the sea. That's how I called it. So I was like, actually, just for 3 days, trying to enter each and every hotel and then see where does the landscape and whole machinery that is maintaining tourism is being touched, where the landscape is touching the hotels, more or less. And that's now all very abstract because we have nothing to see, but maybe it's better if I would explain you the very method of doing this, because it's like, I say that I use text and image, and then these images that I use are also taken from the videos that I make, and these videos are not made to be watched, but are actually made in order to later write the text that I use. And this is something that I always do. I would say I have this like little mission. I go somewhere to find something, and then I observe this something, and then because I have this camera, I also have a chance to slow down this situation in a way that through this lens that I have and through the zoom function of my camera. I have this illusion of getting closer to my subject. And this is very different than when you just take a picture or when you observe without the lens in between. So while doing that, I become aware of my thoughts and I become aware of the situation in a way that I usually would not be aware of. And then after I, like through this camera, I observe this, I have this very strong illusion of coming close to what I watch, but I'm at the same time doomed to fail because this is just an illusion. I have this endless zoom that is then breaking this image, and this image is becoming almost like it's a very broken image. And I like this as an effect that is also standing for this inability of mine to come close to the subject. And when I become aware of this, that my subject is staying distant, I also become aware of myself being a subject of this situation and also this observation. And with this experience, I go home and then I write text about of a memory of this experience. And only when I write this text, then I revisit the videos that I filmed. And then I take screenshots from these videos. And then it's a big question, why is this any different from taking a picture? Or is it at all? I stand at some point where I feel that it's a very same thing. But what happens that is different is that I have this very stretched moment that would precede clicking the shutter and then reporting about this that comes before making a picture. Yeah.
I think you also now answered one of my questions, which was about to be like, what is the role of the remembers in the process? But maybe to connect back to the landscapes that you were talking about, we should mention that you were a couple of years ago here in Split for another project. So maybe you can tell us more about it, but what I'm interested to find out is, how do you remember Split? How is it now in your remembering?
Yeah. Well, we obviously did prepare a bit for this, and I read your questions some days ago, and like all questions were totally like fine, but in this one, how do you remember Split, was the one that really like I felt like if I had only like 5 days longer, I would write a text exactly about this. How do I remember Split? Because first thing, but now because I didn't do that and we don't have work about remembering of Split, I have to tell you that I know the reasons why I went to Split, but what really stayed with me is that through this one example, or like this one little project that I did in Split back then, when I was invited by Queer Archive and Platforma Doma Mladih, I was invited to approach the building of Dom and to react on it, to try to understand it somehow, to like do something with this. And I had 3 days, I think. And what I remember about it, what first comes to my mind is that exactly this work helped me later understand what role does circling play in my work. Like exactly this kind of walking around the subject and taking all these different positions in order to look back at this one thing in the middle and then go inside of the thing and watch out. This is something that is really like connecting all my works, and not only circling around it, but also the walk and everything that happens on the way, meaning that I do have to enter another building in order to go to the rooftop of that building to see it from this angle, and then to talk to people who should let me up stairs, and then listen to their stories and write down what they say or record and so on. So this is like I have to embody all these different points of view in order to have this one final one that I use to construct the text. And usually the text comes before I decide on images that will be shown. And this was also the first time when I did this kind of, it was not the first time, but the first time very site specific to give this live reading in front of a slideshow that is related to the text that I read. Later, I repeated it, and this was something that inspired me to also start experimenting with separating image and text. So I would maybe in last 3 examples, let's say in Venice and in Funchal and in Vienna, I would do this little mission, as I said. I would go there, I would watch it, I would come back home, I would write the text, but then I would choose exact place of reading, and then I would read this text there. And then I would invite audiences to walk back together to a place of watching the images. And in this case, this question of remembrance became also very relevant. Like, is it, what do we remember? Because I tell you about my experience, but then you have your experience of listening to something that forms also other kind of images. And then I show you totally different images. So do these images refer to my story of my experience, or to your story of your experience listening me reading? So Split was a very important, even though this had nothing to do with tourism itself, it was like a little project within the project, but it really helped me understand that this embodiment of like different points of view and like giving them some kind of a precise position and voice is something that I work with.
Okay, of course, you combine text and photos, and I guess they complement one each other. But do you see that each one of them has some kind of limitations? And maybe especially we can now talk about the limitations of photography. Are there any, or how do you see that? I mean, now also we are talking a bit abstract about something that we don't see, but on the other hand, something that can also have a certain limitations in that sense. Do you see the parts that you work with text as some kind of complementary methodology of explaining your vision, or just as a method of your research? And yeah, what kind of limitations can photography have in that sense? Because you also at one point you said that you ask yourself, can I be a photographer who takes photos, not in order to show them, but as an excuse to write? I find this quite interesting because you're questioning, and also during this talk, I see that you think and rethink a lot about your profession. So maybe it would be interesting to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I remember times when I was sort of angry with photography, and I mean, I work as a photographer, I use it a lot, and it's something that is very close to me, and I use this language in many different ways. And I think it was a big relief to understand that it's not what I'm doing is not to prove that photography is weak or incapable or anything else like that. I'm relieved, since I know, like, it happened also exactly in Blackpool, because to Blackpool I went without any mission. I just went as a traveler, like I went as a tourist to see the place, and I did not plan to make any kind of analytical, like I didn't study anything there. I just went there, and I did use my analog camera, and then I came back, and after some time when I developed these pictures, I was really shocked that my own pictures touched me, and that I had this kind of, that I was moved, and I was reminded of the experience and the feeling I had when I was there. So this was something that for a while I was not happy about, because I felt this is somehow contradicting my main thought that photography cannot stand alone, and that it is not this kind of, that we are, but I don't think so. I think photography can stand alone, and we know that it is loaded with meaning, and we know all different ways of understanding what photography does. And this is exactly very important point for myself to understand that it's not what I'm trying to prove or disapprove. There is something magical about photography, and I also think that I'm very capable of making a great image as a photographer. But what I needed within this research was to exactly prove that I'm not going to any swimming pool or any hotel or any beach in order to take a picture. I'm not going there as a photographer who comes back with an image, and this image is not meant to tell us the truth or to touch us when we think about whatever it depicts. I was simply curious, where I felt the limit was that I somehow felt the limit that by showing one image or a series of images that pretend to deal with social phenomenon, I don't think that social phenomenon can be really studied. And that's where I started from. So, and then this topic of experience and being there, and also understanding your role within this scene that you're observing, put somehow writing in the first place, because this was the way that I could. It is still something that I feel is better translating my own experience than the images I would show from these places. And then I don't think that images really complement or are in any way, for example, illustrating. They're there to exactly play with these possible meanings. Like, what is it that you remember, and what is it that you heard, and is it something that happens different because certain images are shown? And then you have this authority of voiceover. Like, when I tell you something while you're watching an image, I actually direct the way you will read the image. And then I'm also curious about this resistance to not read exactly what I'm telling you to read, but then to, go somewhere else with these readings. And yeah, I have no final answers. That's like also something where I'm, you might ask me later about in-betweeners, but I can tell you now that for me, this is really like, the most exciting part of this work is exactly that there are no correct answers, and I'm not meant to find any final solutions. It is exactly this digging into something that was also unknown to myself. I took for granted many things and I just did them intuitively, and this you can continue doing forever. But I somehow also like this chance to do the observation of these processes and to monitor them and to maybe find some formula and formulate it, but not to then make it some kind of a rule or definition, but just to see in what different directions you can go, and how these paths can also maybe come back together.
Thank you. Maybe as we are going towards the end, I maybe want to come back to this topic of the tourism. So I wanted to ask you about what is your point of view regarding how did the mass tourism influence the representation in photography, and what kind of images does it generate today?
Yeah, well, I think from two angles we have this, from both angles. Like, there is this one when there is this promotion in place where you have to promote a destination where people should go and spend their holidays. And there we have this very generic image similar to what I showed you. Like, this is kind of very predictable. Usually there is no humans visible. It's like very dreamy. It's somewhere we don't know where, and it can be, usually when you go there, it's never like it is in these images. And then you have this, my big problem was also that tourists are usually, people make fun of tourists, and it's always someone else, it's never us. And it's like, there are like also like relevant theories in which capacities of a tourist are put in question, like, can they have authentic experience and so on. And then you have this imagery that follows exactly this point of view, where they're depicted as some, ugly, tasteless, dumb people. And I really needed also to make sure that in the way that I'm gonna deal with the tourist, I think my tourist is a very lonely figure, and I'm very curious about this very intimate side of each of them. And I think this is like also in a way that I use my tools, is like I try to also make it very, to show this fragile side. I just don't want to judge and to say it must be this or that way, and then we have a rule about society because that's how all of them must be. Because that we all saw, like, we know Martin Parr images, and it's like nothing to critique but criticize, but I just think I'm more curious about also this very intimate and very, like, I'm really curious if could it be that what makes me choose a remote, distant place to stay alone and swim naked is the same. Is this the same desire that makes someone, spend 10 days drunk in a beach bar? And I then have to be careful when I want to depict it, not like, or not to, can I explore this urges and desires, and because I wanted to escape from this like usual typical kind of prejudice way of looking at, and I think that's also maybe limit of photography, I believe, because that's what I don't like. I think photography often just adds to a prejudice that we already have. You know, like we know how Turkish minority in 15th district might look like, and then you go there to take pictures of it, and then you repeat the image that you already saw. So you're somehow adding to this idea. And that's where I felt limit. And back to your previous question, I wanted to escape this predefined code that photography is somehow implying, and that's why I'm not going there to take this one iconic monumental image, but I go there to see what is around this image and to somehow dig through. Yeah.
We have one question. Maybe if we can now open the floor for that, if you want. Svetlana here, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Hello, I will unmute myself, but I'm not going to start the video because I'm in a very dark room and I'm not really properly dressed, so I'm just going to talk. So hello from London, ciao, Bog. So I know Katarina for a very long time, and actually I will actually ask one question that goes back to one of her works, early works I would say, or earlier works, which is called I Found Nothing. Which went back to her kind of one of her childhood places. I think it was Antwerp. And I think back at that time, because she was tracing some photography that she looked as a child about that period when she was very little, maybe couldn't remember how it was like, but those photographs were some kind of like evidence of some experiences. She went back, and then there was this first maybe booklet, I Found Nothing. You know, so I would just like this little arch, if you can make from that work to this kind of work you're conducting now, this research. Because you actually went to find something which you didn't find, but you found something else. And now whether you go actually to places to find something, is it something maybe even unconscious desire to find something, you know, because you're very humane towards your subject, you know, you're very tender toward this kind of a almost caricature image of a tourist, you know, that also we from UK, I'm based in UK, and all these people who go to, you know, Benidorm, they're just like ridiculed all the time, you know. And I want actually to humanize that figure of a tourist, you know, who goes to these places, you know. So yeah, that question, whether you go to actually find something, despite maybe not wanting to admit yourself that you want to find something, and at the same time, maybe also subconscious desire to surprise yourself, you know, just like
exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's exactly what happens. I think I somehow arm myself with very precise questions that give me a guide, you know, like I get ready because I want to be focused. But then what is equally important is to stay open for surprises, because I think that's exactly also what we as tourists, I think, all share, no matter how, if our taste is different or whatsoever might separate us. I think this need for discovery is what is really, I would say, after all of these different examples, I would claim that discovery is something that connects all of us as tourists. And I think when I go to search for something, I expect to find certain things, but I also am ready for surprises, and I'm actually alert to not miss them. So it's like a part of the list of things that I should do, you know, like I should not miss surprises. I should be aware that some things will happen that I could not imagine in advance, and that I should be careful not to miss them so that I can then take this as an insight as well. That's very true, because this work from Antwerp was exactly dealing with this, like I'm searching, I went back to the place where I grew up after 30 years of not being there, with all the pictures from the childhood, curious, will I really, you know, like revoke something, will something come back to me? And while I was searching for those things, I just realized that no, I'm actually now building a new memory that will be a memory that I might remember later. So it's like, and it also is written as a diary, like in a very like day by day and so on. because it deals with this authenticity of a memory at the same time. And then even maybe in the case of tourists, when we can judge if their discovery is authentic, I think even when it's staged, because that's what, of course, I think industry of tourism know, they know it. They know that everyone who travels somewhere would like to have this feeling that he find out something that nobody ever saw before. But I think even if this is the case, I think this feeling counts, even though it's staged. I think this feeling that you found out something that you did not know before, even though it's like planned, that you find it exactly on that, I don't know, where they take you in weird places, and then I think this counts. This is relevant feeling that we all can somehow, I think we share it. And thank you, Svetlana, for the question.
Thanks for answering.
I don't know if I answered, but it did trigger me to think about connection between searching and finding.
You mentioned this work, maybe now I'm spoiling too much, but I guess some of the people won't be able to see it, but you are mentioning these places that are off the beaten track. And you say that they are also playing the role, the same role in that machinery. So maybe that's also kind of like continuation of what you were talking about. Or do you see some kind of distinction between these places that are off the beaten track? Is there something extra particular for you as a researcher in them, or of course not just as a photographer, but as a researcher?
No, I think I choose them just out of it's my personal taste, I would say. But I don't think I think even though, you know, like you have this whole different categories of tourists, and then you have those who like believe that they're so very special because they don't go to super nice places. But that's also in the category, like you belong to certain categories still. And I don't think it's for me, like, not to make all these categories to understand what kind of tourists exist, but rather to think if there is any kind of, you know, line that would connect all these ways of searching for escape or discovering this and that. I think that's something that I'm more curious about. So I think even if it's off the beaten track, it's something that is, I think even within the track, there is people who believe that they're off the track because they need this, I think they need this feeling of discovering something that, you know, was, you know, they go back home and they tell stories about things that they, you know, they were in a very special, authentic restaurant and nobody, this, you know, like, but this is, I would not judge that. I think this kind of, it really does what it is about, you know, like, I don't think it's, even if it's not authentic. I mean, what is authentic? It's a big question. There is a question, I see.
Yes, so I'm going to read it just aloud so that people also on Facebook can see it. So we have a question from Gloria Lizde. How do you see this specific work about tourism developing further? If yes, in what direction do you think it's going to continue, or you feel like the work is finished?
Well, yeah, it's a good question because I'm just at a point within this, at least within this research that I'm doing at the university. I feel that I have a list of different examples that brought me to different insights, and I would now like to find a way to note down all the connections between all these different examples, and to think of a way to shape all these possible directions into a final work. And what this final work will be, I tend to imagine a book again, just because I was also very suspicious about the book format from the beginning. And then I also imagine maybe some kind of, I don't know, it's like very difficult to say. It's somehow going towards an end, but it's not done yet. And it's a sad story that I can't really show you all different examples, because my work happens very much not in order to create a final product, but to do what I'm doing, and then like to all the time do what you're doing, and to have it's documented and to have it, you know, presented and represented, it's a bit difficult to do. And that's where I'm at the moment struggling. I would like to find a way to report about this experience of doing all of that. And yeah, might be a book, might be some other format, but this I will decide once when I analyze everything I collected so far. So if I will continue working on tourism after this one is done, I can't say at this point. I think it might follow me in one shape or another, but it was also, I would say, just one of possible examples. I think it's also in my case funny that I think anything could be an example of analysis in this way.
Does anyone have anything else to ask? If not, at least from my side, it was super interesting, and it was really great to go deep into your work, into the processes that you apply, and we are super happy to be able to also screen your video here in the exchange office. Yes, Yasmina, do you want to say anything else to finalize the conversation?
I just want to thank you, Katarina, and to everyone who participated here. I see here also through windows that there are people stopping and watching us through the window shop. So that's also an interesting experience. I would like to invite again everyone who is from Split to come and see your work that is shown in Exchange Office in Epotova 1, just next to Peristyle, today until 9 p.m. and tomorrow from 4 to 9 p.m. We hope to host you, Katarina, soon in person. But really thank you for this virtual conversation and virtual visit to your practice.
Yes, thank you very much for being with us. Do you have anything else to add before we close?
No, I just want to thank you all. I really, it's like so, I think I've never done anything like so with like really without any visual examples. I have no idea how it came to the people who were listening to it. I hope these few people I know, who I'm very grateful, join us to hear from them later how this was, because I have no clue. But thank you for all the questions and for this opportunity. I mean, I wish I was there, but what to do next time.
And thank you for sharing this link to the video. At least now people can watch it. Apologies again for the technical issues. I guess this is the Diocletian Palace, so the Wi-Fi is not very good. We would like to invite you all also to follow the program and to see all the other online conversations that are going to happen with other artists. Thank you once again, everyone, and good night. See you in Split.